Quite possibly one of the meanest but funniest trolls I have ever seen is this story right here. And it's titled, "In Which I Express a Heartfelt Apology to Rolling Stone Journalist Amanda Robb." I just want to say, this is by Pax Dickinson. I believe he was like the CTO of some company who got fired because he was a misogynist, bigot, racist, or something like that. I'm not super familiar. Google him. I will say, look at this face. He trolled this woman into wearing a MAGA hat, traveling all across the northeast-ish, whatever area, eastern coast. And that's just so mean. The story's hilarious. I have a sense of humor, but I can recognize this poor woman. My God, we're going to read through this story, and you'll probably end up laughing, but I hope that even after you recognize how funny it is, you do feel some sympathy for this journalist who was put on this ridiculous wild goose chase. And I will also add after that, Amanda, you should not have fallen for this. They say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. You should have known better, but it's a funny story. So here we go. There's an editor's note. Press accountability, defined as dynamic of interaction between a given medium and the value sets of individuals or groups receiving media messages, is one of the fundamental tenets of a free, open, and democratic society. We published this piece according to Patrick Lee Pleisance, an example of fluid dynamic of interaction, and as a light rap on the knuckles of journalists who function as political operatives. I get a kick for sure out of journalists who are political operatives, but let's read through this. Hopefully the battery doesn't die in this camera. A fortnight ago, I was contacted by Miss Amanda Robb, who identified herself as having a personal history of difficulty with unsavory wretches of that sort. Oh, okay. Who identified herself as a journalist. Having had a personal history of difficulty with unsavory wretches of that sort, and being a well-known proponent of a harsh criminal punishment for their un-American collectivist scribblings, I of course immediately recommended that Miss Robb engage in a vigorous act of self-procreation. He told her to go fuck herself. All right. She would not be deterred. Apparently, she was aggressively persistent. Told Pax she is a journalist for the widely known Rolling Stone magazine, which magazine I learned is not actually solely published for the manipulative character assassination of washed-up entertainers and the dissemination of libelous false rape accusations against innocent frat boys. Yes, that's it. There's links to those stories. But purports to do actual journalism. I questioned this ambition, of course, but Miss Robb assured me that the former incautious Rolling Stone editors responsible for the recent libelous rape fiction had been quite thoroughly sacked after the massive financial settlement. This is an overly verbose article. If you want to read it, I recommend you do, but I want to try and hit at the main points of this and then get back to ragging on everything about it. Basically, he talks about Miss Robb's prior work. Marie Claire, The Guardian, The Investigative Fund, The Nation. The Nation is far left. The Guardian is left. And so he said, I could only conclude Miss Robb must be undoubtedly among the finest politically axe-grinding journalists working in stale boomer left-wing pop music magazines. So she's probably, left-wing or whatever. He explained that he's retired to the quiet life of a simple gentleman farmer, knew and cared little about comic books. She wanted to talk to him about comic books, and did not seek further attention from the media propaganda complex. He explained that he considered her employees in her profession to be distasteful at best and criminal at worst, and that he expected she might not have the best intentions toward him, giving knowledge about how modern journalism is done, and his past experiences being subject to the yellow press. I directly and forthrightly informed Miss Robb that I considered her to be my enemy and refused to help her. Miss Robb, however, was not to be discouraged by any such declaration. Let me stop right here and say, listen, if you email someone asking for a quote or statement and they tell you to fuck off, end of story. Sure, you could be a little persistent and say, I'm gonna send you, here's what I'd do. If someone said fuck off, I'd send another email saying, I get it, here's the question anyway, feel free to answer or not, I'm out. And then they can choose to answer it or not. You've done your due diligence, you sent the question, if you can't get it, you can't get it. No. She insisted on the interview, despite his pugnacious resistance, and emphatically asserted it would be helpful for her story. Okay. He reluctantly agreed and set up a meeting with her in New York for the next afternoon. He said, I wasn't in New York, and in fact, I was at my home over 100 miles away. I had absolutely no ability or plans to be in New York City by that next day, but Mrs. Robb was so insistent that I decided to just make the appointment with her and hope for the best. Okay. For security reasons, I texted Miss Robb to change the location to a different one to which I hoped to somehow be, despite never having left my home, which is, as I said, over 100 miles away. She never got my message until she was at home, so it all worked out, except for the small detail of actually doing an interview. I was quite comfortable with the outcome, but regrettably, Miss Robb was less than satisfied. He explained that he lived 100 miles away from New York, and he wasn't planning on any trips to New York in the foreseeable future. So any interview was simply impossible. Okay. He told her to fuck off. He told her he wouldn't do an interview. He told her he hated her and she was his enemy. He set an appointment with her in New York, didn't show up, and then said, I don't even live in New York and I'm not gonna go there. And she still decided to try and get the interview. Maybe her boss made her do it. I have no idea. So, okay, he said an interview was impossible. She immediately suggested driving 3 hours to rural Pennsylvania to talk to him. After all of this, he said I demurred. But she explained that comic books and the manners and methods of procuring funds for the production of such was of such importance, she would gladly drive over 100 miles to talk to me despite my repeated professions of ignorance and declarations of refusal to help. He said he doesn't know. He said fuck off. He said I'm not gonna help you. He sent you on a wild goose chase in New York and then told you he didn't actually live in New York. At what point are you gonna be like, dude's fucking with me? He's not gonna help me, doesn't like me, he's fucking with me. Okay. First, he agreed, but explained that he required significant security measures for the meetings with the disreputable journalist class. She would have to follow his directives. He told her to purchase a bright red MAGA hat before her trip. He said, I explained that the fashionable hat would cost $35 due to its quality American-made construction, but assured her that her paymasters at Rolling Stone would certainly reimburse her. I explained that I needed her to have the hat for identification purposes later. Oh my God. On the appointed date, she eventually arrived later than the expected time, as is the wont of her gender and profession, but arrived nonetheless. I directed her to the next rendezvous point, a small restaurant with outdoor seating 30 minutes drive further west. I told her that upon arrival at this location, she would sit outside and send me a selfie with the MAGA hat on to confirm her arrival. And there she is. God, this poor doofy dope. I feel so bad. It's a funny article, but come on, man. At this point, you bought a MAGA hat, drove 3.5 hours, even though he told you repeatedly he wasn't going to do it. And there she is, looking doofy with the hat on. At this point, the endeavor has been going precisely according to plan, so I'm not sure what explains Mrs. Robson's clear expression of annoyance in the selfie I received. Perhaps she has had a premonition of the unfortunate disappointment to come. Maybe it would have been after he ditched you in New York and told you never lived there in the first place and lied to you about your meeting. He said I directed Miss Robb up the hill to a pleasant location near the lake in a nearby state park where I imagined that I might have waited had I actually left my house, which I hadn't. She expressed reluctance and then seemingly became confused, sending me a picture of the park sign and the shale pit instead of a lake. Oh my God. So here's what happens. As if a knowledgeable and well-placed journalistic source like myself would imagine hanging out in a dusty shale pit. In retrospect, I suppose a state park with dozens of ambiguous signs marked half a dozen non-interconnecting entrances and extremely spotty cell phone service was not the best choice for a rendezvous location. By the time she arrived at the exact location where I had imagined I might be, I unfortunately was no longer imagining myself there anymore. I certainly tried my best to find Miss Robb despite never having left my house, which was, as I said, a dozen miles away from the park. Now, not wanting to disappoint, I proposed a very early 6:30 a.m. meeting at Cracker Barrel for the next morning, and she accepted. What is this, the third time? You're gonna try again? I gotta imagine she's either not very bright or her bosses are like, you have to do this. So he said, unfortunately, that breakfast was to remain one cracker short of a barrel. In an unforeseen turn of events, I was hypothetically summoned at sunrise to aid a neighbor in rounding up a dozen escaped hogs. Oh my God. I will be there with bells on. I love Cracker Barrel. We don't have them at NYC. I am here, exclamation point. Fuck. I have been helping my neighbor round up escaped pigs since dawn. Can we meet later today? Seriously, escaped pigs in the rain? Sounds awful. I am going to stay over again because the rain is terrible, but I want to stay closer to where you are. This is a good area. Actually, before I pay for another night, do you promise you'll meet me today sometime? Tonight is better, let's meet tonight. Oh my god. Okay. That night I changed the time from 7:30 to 9 p.m. on a whim, just to keep Miss Rob entertained. At this time she informed me that her editors were getting irritated. You think? The thought of the finest political editors in the boomer left pop magazine business being personally irritated with my humble antics left me filled with amused pity. Later I messaged Miss Rob to tell her I had been delayed by a henway. She not unreasonably asked, "What's a henway?" To which I of course replied, "About 3 pounds." She didn't understand this. And then I began to rudely question my subsequent promise, to arrive in a bofa. I'll look it up. What's your ETA? I'll be there in a bofa. That doesn't sound legit. In other words, you're not coming? Just one more bofa. I don't know. I really don't know what that means. Bofa these nuts. In conclusion, I'd like to say that I am truly sorry we had such trouble arranging to meet up with Miss Rob. I realize that journalism depends on good faith and trust between journalists and sources, and I'd hate to see our repeated poor luck inspire unscrupulous and mischievous fellows to waste the time of well-meaning journalists like yourself. If journalists had to wonder every time they made an appointment and were required to buy a right-wing hat, if this was some sort of trick to embarrass them, it's possible that no journalism would ever get done at all. Is that the kind of world we want to live in? I don't. I'd be worried about all the blood rushing out of my brain from the massive schadenfreude erection I would get. He said, Miss Rob, shall we try once more? I'll be at Famous Ray's Pizza in Brooklyn on Tuesday at noon. No, the other one this time. I swear I'll show up. PPS, wear the hat. How mean. It's funny. I hope you all found it funny, because we can all have sense of humors about this. And I do have sympathy and empathy for Miss Rob, who was put through this wild goose chase. As much as I want to sympathize with the amount of, with everything she went through, I also want to just be a little critical and say, at a certain point, you have to respond back with "fuck you too." Is that so difficult? Perhaps her bosses made her do it. And if that's the case, she got to go on a little mini vacation driving around wasting time, and she got paid to do it. So it is what it is. Ultimately, I don't really know who Pax Dickinson is. I hear he's a rather unscrupulous fellow as per his own words. He seems like he might be a mean dude, but I gotta admit, I did laugh a lot when I first read this story. It doesn't mean I condone what he does. It just means I recognize that it's a funny story. But let me know what you think. Comment, and happy 4th of July, everybody. Go out, drink, be merry, and blow up things insofar as legal to do so. Some states have made fireworks pretty illegal, but today is the day where you get to buy things that blow up and go and blow them up. It's the 4th of July. But make sure you follow your local laws, because this is America, and we have laws in this country that, anyway, happy 4th of July.